Hi, today I'll be looking at the absolute peak of human humiliation around wild animals. These people completely abandon common sense, resulting in the most embarrassing ways to go. I'm sure they're American. From a man whose pants came down inside a zoo enclosure to two brothers who entered a bear den to prove they were manly, only to prove the exact opposite. It was May 16, 2017, at a family petting zoo in Columbus, Ohio, and the weekend crowd had filled every pathway between the animal pens. Carvel David Holt was 44 years old and worked as a warehouse supervisor at a distribution center on the east side of the city. He had spent the previous 2 weeks on sick leave recovering from a serious chest infection and had only started feeling like himself again a few days before. His 12-year-old son, Breck, had come home for a short school break and had no interest in the zoo, telling his father plainly that he thought it would be boring. Carvel insisted they were going anyway because he wanted them to spend time together before work picked back up. His wife Selvin had reservations from the start. She felt he was still recovering and needed more rest, and she knew from years of experience that her husband had a habit of trying to prove things at the wrong moment. 2 years earlier at a family picnic, he had climbed onto the roof of a small shed to show his nephews he could jump into a hay pile the way he had done as a teenager. He landed badly, bruised his hip, tore his trousers, and was the subject of family jokes for months afterward. She nearly kept them from going, but had a job interview that afternoon and eventually let them leave. I think about Selvin sitting in that interview not knowing what was happening. She had the right instinct from the beginning, and life pulled her elsewhere at exactly the wrong moment. The zoo was busy with families and children crowded around the enclosures feeding goats and sheep. Breck looked bored for most of the visit, until a pygmy goat reached through the fence and grabbed his baseball cap. The goat began chewing on it while children nearby laughed, and a zoo worker picked up a feed bucket and started walking toward the pen to distract the animal. Carvel decided he could get the cap back before the worker reached the fence. He swung one leg over. The fence around the enclosure stood roughly 2 feet high and had been built to contain small animals, not to support an adult climbing across it. As Carvel moved his second leg over the top rail, the pocket of his cargo shorts caught on a wooden fence post and held him in place. He twisted and pulled, trying to free himself without tearing the fabric while a growing number of visitors watched. If you have ever been embarrassed in public and made it worse by rushing, you already understand what happened next. When the pocket finally slipped loose, the sudden release threw his weight backward before he could correct it. He fell and the back of his head struck the thick wooden support post at the corner of the enclosure. He dropped to the ground and did not move. The people closest to him hesitated for a moment because he had been smiling only seconds before, and a few children laughed, assuming it was part of the entertainment. When he did not get up, the mood shifted immediately. Zoo staff and visitors moved toward him and emergency services were called. Paramedics arrived within minutes and began working on him at the scene. As paramedics worked on his father, the startled goat dropped the baseball cap onto the ground. The zoo worker quietly picked it up and handed it to Breck without saying anything. I do not know why that detail hit me the way it did. Some moments are just too big for anyone to know what to say. The impact caused a severe traumatic brain injury, and he had lost consciousness on impact. Resuscitation efforts continued through transport and into the emergency room, but the damage was not reversible. Carvel died that afternoon. Selvin was called away from her job interview, and she and Breck were left to cope with a loss that had begun with what should have been an ordinary family outing. Following the incident, the zoo strengthened access controls, reviewed maintenance procedures, and required additional safety training for all employees. That one started over a baseball cap and a father who could not help himself. What comes next is completely different. A man who was not trying to be a hero. He just wanted to take the fastest shortcut. It was November 3rd, 2019, at a wildlife park in Colorado. The evening was cool as staff finished their shifts and prepared to leave for the day. Keaton Bird was 27 years old and worked in the gift shop stockroom. A few years earlier, he had invested almost everything he owned into a mobile app he and a friend had spent months developing. Just before they launched it, a much bigger technology company released a similar app with far more features. Their project failed almost immediately. Keaton lost his savings, could no longer pay his rent, and had no choice but to leave his hometown and move to another city to start over. The zoo offered him a job, and he accepted because he needed the money more than he needed pride. I have watched people pour everything into something and have it collapse for no reason they caused. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes after that. Keaton was still carrying it. Management quickly noticed how hard-working he was, so they kept him in the stockroom where he rarely made mistakes. Keaton never understood the decision. He wanted to work with the animals, not boxes of souvenirs and t-shirts, and grew frustrated whenever new keepers were hired instead of him. After 8 months, the jokes got to him. Coworkers teased that he belonged in the gift shop, not the zoo. Keaton believed the only thing separating him from the keepers was a badge and a few unimportant rules. One rule annoyed him more than any other. Employees who did not work with the animals were not allowed to use the service gate behind the African lion enclosure. Keepers used it every evening because it led to the staff parking area much faster than the public path. Keaton complained about the long walk almost every day. He kept saying the rule was only there to make the keepers feel important, and that nothing dangerous was behind the gate after closing time. Rules that feel like status symbols are the easiest ones to ignore. And sometimes they are just status symbols, but sometimes they are not, and the only way you find out is the hard way. One evening, he finished work later than everyone else. Earlier that day, maintenance crews had been repairing a keeper access door used during routine animal management. The work was still in progress, and a section of the keeper route had been left temporarily open while staff prepared to secure it. As Keaton headed toward the parking area, 2 co-workers saw him walking toward the restricted keeper gate. One laughed and called out that he was going the wrong way. Keaton grinned and waved them off. Confident they would soon see he had been right all along, Keaton noticed the open access point. Ignoring their warnings, he believed this was his chance to prove everyone had been making a big deal over nothing. Without asking anyone, he walked through, expecting the usual evening routine to have already been completed. What Keaton did not know was that the animal schedule had changed that afternoon. The lions had not yet been shifted into their indoor holding area, and he had not been told because he was never part of the keeper briefings. Keaton walked through the keeper passage, believing it was simply a shortcut to the parking area. Seconds later, he realized he had entered the lion's outdoor habitat. One of the lions spotted him and stared. Another stood and began moving toward him. Keaton froze before turning to run back to the access door, but he was too far away. The first lion sprinted toward him and knocked him to the ground, tearing through muscle and bone. Within moments, the other lions joined the attack. The same co-workers who had watched him enter there earlier heard desperate screams coming from beyond the gate. They ran for help, but could do nothing to reach him in time. Emergency services were called immediately after park staff located him. He had suffered catastrophic injuries during the attack and was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators concluded that Keaton's decision to enter a restricted area, combined with the temporary maintenance work and the altered animal schedule, had led to the tragedy. The zoo reviewed its safety procedures, strengthened access controls during maintenance, and reminded all staff that restricted areas exist to protect everyone, even when the danger cannot be seen. Keaton walked through an open gate. This next story is about someone who planned everything, got told no twice, and showed up anyway. It was May 6th, 2016, at a zoo in Florida. The afternoon was warm and quiet as visitors walked through the park on a weekday. Lacey Monroe was 26 years old and worked part-time at a clothing store. She had wanted to be a full-time content creator for years, but her page grew very slowly. Then, 2 of her videos suddenly became popular because she acted out common sayings in real places. One video showed her pretending it was raining cats and dogs at an animal shelter. Another showed her acting like a bull in a china shop inside a thrift store. Those videos brought her more followers than anything she had ever made. After that, she became convinced every new video had to be bigger than the last one. She started writing down different sayings she could turn into videos. One idea stayed in her notebook for weeks. She wanted to explain the saying about crocodile tears while standing beside a real crocodile. Okay. She read online that crocodiles sometimes produce tears while eating and thought people would love seeing it for themselves. The idea itself is honestly creative. I want to be fair about that. The concept works. The execution is where everything fell apart, and it's not because of a small mistake. Before visiting the zoo, Lacey contacted management twice, asking for permission to film near the crocodile exhibit. Both times they refused. They explained that the restricted service area beside the enclosure was only for trained staff and the crocodiles were not props. Lacey left disappointed, but never gave up on the idea. Instead, she decided she would make the video without permission. She chose a quiet weekday afternoon because there were fewer visitors. She waited until the nearest staff members were busy in another section of the zoo. Then she climbed over the visitor rail and slipped into the clearly marked restricted service area beside the crocodile enclosure. A couple standing nearby noticed her climbing over the barrier and warned that staff had already told people not to go in there. Lacey smiled, held up her phone, and replied that the zoo was just being overprotective and that she knew knew exactly what she was doing. She even joked that they would see the finished video online later. She carried a small bag with pieces of raw chicken hidden inside. Her plan was simple. She would throw the chicken toward a resting crocodile, wait for it to start eating, and record herself talking about crocodile tears. The first throw did not go where she wanted. The chicken landed near the edge of the moat instead of close to the crocodile. Lacey became frustrated because she thought the video was falling apart. Instead of giving up, she picked up a long stick from the ground and leaned farther over the edge. She tried to push the chicken closer without climbing any lower. She believed the crocodile would stay where it was until the food reached it. She kept glancing at her phone to make sure the camera was still recording. I think about content creators I have followed who do similar things every single week, and the margin between a viral video and what happened here is often just luck. Then, the crocodile lunged forward with explosive speed toward the movement near the water. Lacey tried to pull the stick back, but the crocodile clamped its jaws onto the end of it. The sudden force pulled her off balance. She stumbled against the edge of the enclosure and one arm slipped over the side into the moat. The crocodile immediately seized her arm and dragged with enormous strength. Lacey screamed as nearby visitors called for help. The same people who had watched her brush off their warning could only scream for help as the crocodile dragged her toward the water. It kept pulling her before she went still. Zoo staff rushed to the enclosure and used emergency equipment to force the crocodile to release its grip after several tense moments. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, and Lacey was rushed to the hospital with devastating injuries. Despite emergency treatment, she later died from catastrophic blood loss caused by the injuries to her arm. Investigators later found the raw chicken, the stick, and the phone she had been using to film. The unfinished recording showed the moments leading up to the attack, but was never uploaded. Zoo management confirmed they had denied her requests because entering the restricted area placed both visitors and staff in danger. The incident later became a warning about the risks of ignoring safety rules and entering restricted animal enclosures for social media content. Lacey knew the zoo had said no. What comes after this is about someone who invented something she never tested and performed it in front of 30 people who believed every word she said. It was June 22nd, 2021, at a wildlife sanctuary in Asheville, North Carolina. The afternoon was warm and quiet as visitors walked through the grounds on a weekday. Fenimore Yaskulski was 30 years old and worked part-time at a bookstore. She had loved animals since she was a little girl and often organized small paid tours to parks and sanctuaries to earn extra money. She never became a zookeeper or a wildlife expert, but she read articles and watched documentaries whenever she could. She liked being the person everyone leaned on, and she liked it even more when people believed she had every answer. The tour that day was her biggest group yet. Almost 30 people had paid to join, and Fenimore wanted everything to go perfectly. She spent nights preparing beforehand and told everyone she had visited the sanctuary many times before. As the group moved through the grounds, she stayed near the front and answered questions before the real staff guides could speak. I know someone like Fenimore, someone who occupies the front of the room with total confidence and rarely leaves space for doubt. The problem is that confidence and knowledge are not the same thing. A year earlier, after watching a video online, Fenimore invented her own greeting gesture for elephants. She would raise her left hand, sweep it sideways twice, then tap her shoulder once. She told friends the gesture calmed elephants and claimed they could sense the difference. She had made it up completely and never once tried it near a real elephant. Before the tour, Fenimore asked sanctuary staff twice if she could bring her group closer to the elephant barrier for a demonstration. Both times, they refused. They explained the service path beside the enclosure was for trained keepers only, and the elephant was not used for shows. Fenimore left annoyed, but kept the idea in her mind for the tour. When the group reached the habitat, they stopped to watch the sanctuary's oldest bull elephant. A man asked if she could show everyone the gesture up close. Several people turned toward her with excitement, because she had sounded so sure all day. Fenimore felt a rush of embarrassment at admitting she had never tested it. She stepped over the low visitor fence into the marked staff-only zone about 10 feet from the barrier. A nearby keeper shouted for her to stop at once, but Fenimore kept walking toward the open floor. Elephants can feel vibrations through their feet and trunk, picking up on footsteps and movement from surprisingly far away. That is part of why an unfamiliar person walking into their space gets noticed almost instantly, even before the person gets close. She faced the elephant, raised her hand, swept it sideways twice, and tapped her shoulder. Nothing happened. elephant. She waited a moment, then took 2 more steps closer, believing she was simply too far for it to notice. She invented that and then performed it in front of 30 people. I think about the social pressure that creates and how hard it becomes to say out loud that you do not actually know what you are doing. The elephant had never been trained to respond to any gesture. It grew alert and shifted its weight as an unfamiliar person entered its private space. It lowered its head, let out a loud, trumpeting sound, and charged forward immediately. It struck her once with its trunk and head, knocking her down hard before keepers could reach her. Staff pulled the group back while emergency crews were called and arrived within minutes. Fenimore did not survive the incident. Investigators later confirmed Yaskulski had crossed into a restricted keeper zone without permission and that her invented gesture had never been part of any training program at the sanctuary. Many on the tour admitted they trusted her, only because she sounded confident. The incident became a warning about the risks of ignoring safety barriers around large animals for the sake of looking like an expert. Now the next story is quieter and in some ways harder to read. A woman who just wanted one photograph to show her daughters she was not just a security guard. It was July 14th, 2015, at a zoo in Oregon, and the afternoon shift was moving through its usual routine when it stopped being routine. Wyrell Haskins was 38 years old and had spent the last several years putting her life back together after a divorce that left her raising 2 daughters alone. She had lost 2 jobs before the zoo hired her, one at a supermarket after ongoing conflict with a manager, and one at a warehouse where ignoring workplace procedures had caught up with her. Finding steady work after that had not been easy, and when the zoo position came through, she told herself she would not lose another one. The pay was modest, but it covered rent and kept food on the table, and that was enough. She had been there 4 months, preparing meat for the big cats while trained keepers handled all enclosure access. Her daughters, 13 and 16, refused to believe she actually worked at the zoo, joking that she was probably just a security guard. Wanting to prove them wrong, Wyrell became fixated on getting a photograph beside a tiger. She brought it up so often that co-workers repeatedly told her to forget the idea. Her daughters teasing her about being a security guard is such a specific kind of hurt. The kind that sounds small but settles somewhere deep. I get why she wanted the photo. I genuinely do. One afternoon, a senior keeper overheard her and made it clear that the carnivore service corridor was strictly off limits to untrained staff. Wyrell insisted she only wanted one photograph. The keeper told her it was never going to happen and ordered her to drop it. Wyrell nodded and said she understood. Still determined to prove herself, Wyrell began watching the staff's access routine. She noticed a senior keeper occasionally left an access card on the prep counter while signing paperwork. Days later, when it happened again, she grabbed the card, picked up a tray of meat to look like she belonged there, and headed for the carnivore service corridor. 2 co-workers immediately called after her. One asked where she thought she was going with the tray. The other reminded her she had already been told no by the senior keeper. Rather than admit they were right, she insisted it would only take 30 seconds, pushed past them, and entered the corridor. Please understand, every person in this video had someone trying to stop them. I just don't understand why people act the way they do sometimes. The tiger was being shifted through the service corridor as part of the afternoon feeding routine. Keepers on the far end of the passage were managing the shift from their position and had not yet been alerted that an unauthorized person had entered from the other end. Wyrell moved into the corridor with the tray raised and her phone out, looking for the frame she had been picturing for weeks. When the tiger saw the meat and the unfamiliar person holding it, it moved toward her before she had taken 3 steps into the passage. Tigers are not domesticated and do not extend the behavioral patterns they develop with familiar handlers to strangers who enter their space unannounced. The tiger had never encountered Wyrell inside the corridor. Her presence, her scent, and the meat she was carrying placed her outside every routine he associated with that space. He moved toward the tray immediately, and the distance between them closed faster than she could react. The initial contact knocked her backward into the corridor wall. The bite closed around her upper chest and shoulder with the force a large male tiger generates when he is focused on food, and the injuries were catastrophic within seconds. Keepers on the far end activated. The emergency separation controls the moment the alert came through, and responders reached the corridor as quickly as the protocol allowed. But Wyrell had already been down for several seconds before anyone reached her. Wyrell Haskins died from the catastrophic injuries she suffered during during the attack. Investigators found that she had taken a staff access card without authorization and entered a restricted area despite a direct warning from a senior keeper and the objections of at least 2 co-workers who had tried to stop her at the door. The zoo's protocols were found to be sound. The failure had been entirely in following them. Her daughters were told that afternoon. Wyrell went in alone and made every decision herself. This last one is different because someone else started it. A joke between 2 brothers that neither of them knew how to stop once it began. It was July 14th, 2021, at a wildlife park in Colorado. The afternoon was warm, and visitors walked slowly past the animal enclosures. Garrett Rourke, 28, worked as a construction supervisor and had a habit of turning everything into a competition. His younger brother, Torsten, 25, worked as a retail manager and hated losing even more. Their family had seen this pattern many times before. Torsten remarked that the bears looked smaller than he expected. Garrett laughed and called him scared. Torsten denied it, but Garrett kept mocking him for backing out. People nearby began to notice, and Torsten's face grew hot. Wanting to prove himself, he climbed onto the retaining wall, stepped over the fence, and stood on the narrow strip between the fence and the enclosure. A few onlookers stopped. A woman shouted for him to get back. Someone reached for a phone to call park staff. Warning signs along the viewing area prohibited climbing the wall or crossing the fence. Torsten had ignored them all. Garrett hadn't expected him to actually do it, but strangers were watching now, and staying put would make it look like he dared his brother into something he was too afraid to do himself. Unwilling to lose face, he followed him over the wall. I have been in rooms where someone says something and you can feel the whole thing start to tilt, where the only way out feels like going further in. Neither brother moved. Backing down meant losing. This wildlife park had been operating since the early 1980s. It was a privately owned wildlife park known for housing rescued predators and older animals. The grizzly habitat used an older enclosure design. Instead of a deep protective moat, visitors were separated from the enclosure by a reinforced steel fence positioned behind a low concrete retaining wall. Strangers were shouting, signs were right there, and neither of them moved because the other one was watching. If there is one thing I want you to carry out of this video, let it be that no audience is worth that. The male grizzly had been resting beneath a group of trees at the rear of the enclosure. Visitors often leaned over the wall, but people standing beyond the protective fence were something entirely different. The bear stood up. Grizzly bears can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour. They are incredibly powerful and will defend their territory aggressively. A grizzly bear can weigh up to 800 pounds and possess devastating strength and speed. Garrett saw the bear moving first. Without saying a word, he grabbed the fence, climbed back over it, and dropped safely onto the visitor's side. Torsten turned to follow him. As he swung one leg over the fence, he looked back toward the bear for only a moment. It was enough. His foot slipped from the top rail. His balance shifted forward instead of backward. He fell into the enclosure onto hard ground. He landed heavily, breaking his right ankle and fracturing his left wrist. The impact knocked the air out of him. He tried to stand but collapsed immediately. The bear covered the distance far faster than Torsten expected. It accelerated toward him with explosive power. Torsten tried to crawl away but could not move fast enough. The bear reached him and struck him with tremendous force. Torsten screamed as it attacked him repeatedly. He tried to protect himself but could not escape the animal's strength. Within seconds, he was overwhelmed. Visitors screamed as parents pulled children away. Staff radioed an emergency code and rushed to the exhibit, but unlocking security gates took time. Keepers used air horns and other deterrents to distract the bear, but it was not enough. By the time staff entered the enclosure, Torsten had suffered fatal injuries. He was pronounced dead before he could be airlifted to a trauma center. The park later installed taller fencing and additional surveillance around several of its older exhibits. Garrett made it back over the fence. He watched everything that came after. I do not know how you carry that. A joke that started over a comment about bears, and you spend the rest of your life with what followed.